Take a look at this plane. It looks like a marvel of modern technology. But what you're actually looking at is a crime scene.
Pull up, pull up.
We know the surface story. The door plugs blowing out. The 346 lives lost. The whistleblowers suddenly dying. But the real story, the one that they don't want you to connect, isn't about bad luck. It's about a blueprint. A specific plan written 20 years ago by a small group of men who decided to murder the culture of American engineering to pump up the stock price. This is the story of how the world's greatest company committed suicide. And by the end of this video, you won't look at your plane ticket as a receipt. You're going to see it as a waiver. To understand how hard they fell, you have to understand how high they stood. Back in the 20th century, Boeing wasn't just a company. It was an institution. These are the guys who built the bombers that won World War II. They built the rockets that took us to the moon. They built the 747, the plane that shrank the world. Back then, the CEO was an engineer. The board of directors, engineers. Their motto was simple. If it's not Boeing, I'm not going. They were obsessed with perfection. If a part wasn't right, they stopped the line. Money mattered, sure, but physics mattered more. But in 1997, the virus got in. That year, Boeing merged with a rival company called McDonnell Douglas. On paper, they framed it as Boeing buying a struggling competitor. But insiders knew the truth immediately. One analyst put it perfectly. McDonnell Douglas used Boeing's money to buy Boeing. McDonnell Douglas was failing for a reason. They were a military contractor run by finance guys, not plane builders. Their leaders worshipped Jack Welch, the CEO of General Electric, who invented the profit at all costs mindset. Their philosophy was brutal but simple. Cut costs, fire the bottom 10% of your staff, and do whatever it takes to juice the quarterly earnings. When the two companies merged, a war broke out. On one side, the Boeing Boy Scouts engineers who wanted to build great jets. On the other side, the McDonnell Douglas hunter-killers finance guys who wanted to strip mine the company for cash. The hunter-killers won. Harry Stonecipher, the executive who eventually took charge, didn't even hide it. He famously said, "I changed the culture of Boeing so that it was going to be run like a business rather than a great engineering firm." Be careful what you wish for. To make sure the takeover stuck, the new bosses moved Boeing's headquarters from Seattle, where the planes were actually built, to Chicago. They claimed it was for strategic focus. But the real reason was darker. They wanted to get away from the engineers. They didn't want to hear about safety concerns. They just wanted to hear the sound of the stock price going up. And for a while, it worked. Wall Street loved it. The stock soared. The executives thought they were geniuses. But in reality, they were just lighting the fuse on a time bomb. The first major symptom showed up in 2003 with the 787 Dreamliner. The 787 was supposed to be a revolution. The first commercial jet made mostly of carbon fiber. Lighter, faster, more fuel efficient. But developing a brand new plane costs billions. And this finance-focused board didn't want to spend the money. They looked at R&D as a cost to be cut. So they came up with a radical plan: extreme outsourcing. In the past, Boeing built the plane themselves. They controlled the quality, they controlled the schedule. For the 787, they decided to become a systems integrator. They wouldn't build the plane, they would just assemble it. They told suppliers in Japan, Italy, and France, "You design the wings, you pay for the tools, we'll just bolt the pieces together." It sounded like a financial masterpiece. They pushed the cost and risk onto someone else. But there was a fatal flaw. When you outsource the work, you outsource the expertise. And when you outsource the expertise, you lose control of the quality. The result was chaos. Fuselage sections arrived from Italy that physically didn't fit together. Mechanics found metal shavings inside the electrical bays. Wings from Japan were late. Because Boeing had fired thousands of their own oversight engineers to save money, nobody was left to catch these mistakes. The 787, supposed to be the cheap program, ended up 3 years late and billions over budget. They spent more money fixing the mess than they would have spent building it themselves. You'd think they learned their lesson. You'd think they'd realize engineering requires control, but instead of pivoting back to safety, they doubled down on greed. This brings us to the most absurd chapter. The chapter that explains why doctor plugs are falling off planes in 2024. For decades, Boeing owned a massive factory in Wichita, Kansas. It was the heart of their fuselage production. The people there were Boeing employees with decades of tribal knowledge. But in 2005, the finance executives saw that factory as a liability. Owning factories is expensive. You have to pay for maintenance, pensions, unions, so they sold it. They sold their own critical fuselage factory to a private equity firm for $900 million. That factory became an independent company called Spirit AeroSystems. Now, think about the incentives. Spirit was its own business. Their goal was profit. Boeing was their customer. Boeing's goal was to squeeze Spirit for lower prices. So, Boeing demanded cuts. Spirit, trying to survive, cut costs. They cut staff. They reduced training. They sped up the production line. And when you speed up the line, mistakes happen. Workers at Spirit reported being pressured to ignore defects. Whistleblowers like John Barnett, a quality manager, revealed workers were fitting substandard parts just to meet the quota. He found metal shavings near flight control wires. When he reported it, he was silenced. This wasn't just negligence. It was the system working exactly as designed. Boeing created a pressure cooker where safety was secondary to the schedule. And that pressure cooker was about to explode with the 737 MAX. Fast forward to 2011. Boeing is drowning in the 787 mess. Suddenly, their rival Airbus makes a move. They announce the A320neo. It's a fuel-efficient version of their popular jet. Quiet, cheap to run, and airlines love it. Boeing didn't have a competitor ready. They planned to design a brand new plane, but that takes 10 years. They thought they had time. But then, they got the phone call that stopped their hearts. American Airlines, Boeing's most loyal customer, called them up. "We are about to place the largest aircraft order in history, and we are going to give it to Airbus, unless you can match their efficiency." Boeing asked, "How much time do we have?" The answer, 48 hours. The executives panicked. If they lost American Airlines, the stock would crash. They couldn't wait 10 years. They needed a solution by Monday. So they scrapped the new jet. Instead, they took the 737, a frame designed in the 1960s, and strapped massive new engines onto it. This was the birth of the 737 MAX. It wasn't born from innovation, it was born from desperation. But physics is stubborn. You can't slap giant engines on an old plane and expect it to fly the same. The 737 sits low to the ground. Modern engines are huge. To make them fit, Boeing mounted them higher and further forward. This changed the center of gravity. During takeoff, the weird position of the engines created lift that pushed the nose up. If the nose pitches up too much, the plane stalls and falls out of the sky. Boeing's engineers knew this. Normally, the solution is to redesign the airframe, but that costs money. The other solution is to train pilots in a simulator. But here is where the business case killed the safety case. Boeing promised airlines the MAX was exactly the same as the old 737. They promised no simulator training. If regulators required training, it would cost airlines millions. And if it cost millions, airlines would buy Airbus. So, Boeing had a choice. Admit the plane was different and lose the sales, or hide the problem. They chose option 2. To fix the nose-up tendency, Boeing added a secret software patch called MCAS. If a sensor detected the nose was too high, MCAS automatically pushed it down. This system was powerful. It could move the entire tail stabilizer. But because Boeing wanted to avoid simulator training, they didn't tell the pilots that MCAS existed. It wasn't in the manual. They figured the system would work in the background, but to save even more money, they designed MCAS to rely on just one single sensor. In aviation, redundancy is God. You never rely on one sensor, but Boeing did. If that sensor failed, it would tell the computer that the plane was stalling when it wasn't. MCAS would slam the nose down. The pilots, unaware that this system existed, would pull back up. MCAS would push down again. A fight to the death between pilot and machine. On October 29, 2018, that is exactly what happened to Lion Air Flight 610. The sensor failed. The computer thought the plane was stalling. It pushed the nose down. The pilots fought it for minutes, frantically checking manuals, trying to figure out why their plane was trying to kill them. They crashed into the Java Sea. 189 dead. Boeing's response? They blamed the pilots. They blamed maintenance. They didn't ground the fleet. 5 months later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, same sensor failure, same struggle, same result. 157 dead. Only then was the world forced to look under the hood. And what they found was a culture that had been rotting for 20 years. The 737 MAX crisis cost Boeing $20 billion. But did they learn? Fast forward to January 5th, 2024. Alaska Airlines Flight 1282. A door plug blows out. Why? Because 4 bolts were missing. Why? Because the fuselage came from Spirit AeroSystems with defects. Boeing workers opened it to fix it, and in the chaos of the production line, simply forgot to put the bolts back. It is the same story. The pressure to cut costs leads to defects. The pressure to speed up production leads to missed inspections. The removal of oversight means nobody catches the error. In July 2024, Boeing finally admitted defeat. They agreed to buy Spirit AeroSystems back for $8 billion. They sold it for $900 million to save money. They broke their own supply chain. They caused the death of 346 people, and in the end, they had to pay 10 times the price just to buy the broken pieces back. This is the ultimate irony. Every decision that they made to save money ended up costing a fortune. Every decision that they made to boost the stock price ended up crashing it. They tried to financially engineer their way out of physics, but gravity doesn't care about quarterly earnings. Gravity doesn't care about stock buybacks. Boeing was once a company that reached for the stars. Now it's a company struggling to stay in the sky. And the lesson is clear. When you let the accountants fly the plane, everyone crashes. If you found this documentary valuable, please subscribe. I have a lot more stories like this coming soon. Thanks for watching.